Two of the federal court trying to figure out if a Hadley man detained on a firearms charge will stay behind bars before his trial. Western Mass News reporter Wesley Days is live in studio with more details tonight. Wesley, we're also getting the judge's thoughts tonight.
Yeah, we are, Chris, but we don't have a decision yet. She pointed out concerns about public safety. A 43-year-old Jacob Miller was released. We talked about this yesterday. Miller's being brought up on a federal firearms charge after the FBI raided his Hocknam Road home last week. Amidst the raid, police also found several radioactive items, including plutonium he was selling on his website called Collecting the Periodic Table. Right now, he's not charged with distributing that substance, but the judge brought that up in her initial comments about if he was released, would he be a concern for the community? For the firearms charge, she does believe he could be harmful. Probation in the past has not been followed. Plus, he allegedly didn't follow the judge's previous rule given during his first court appearance to grab only his clothes, his cat, and his care items from his home. He or someone else allegedly moved some of the radioactive items in his basement around before the state's environmental agency was able to investigate that house, not to mention his previous violations against those agencies to stop selling uranium. He told them he would stop. Years later, it was discovered that he kept on doing it. In closing arguments today, prosecutors pointed to his dangerous past, which includes possession of explosive devices charges and child pornography charges, plus a stint in jail. Defense highlighted he doesn't have an ill intent when selling those materials. We caught up with Miller's attorney after court wrapped up. Listen to what he had to say.
We're hopeful that the court will allow him to go back on conditional release. We think we've presented sufficient evidence to establish that he can be or is not going to be or isn't a danger to public safety.
All right, the judge said the decision could come down this week at the earliest. Next week is the latest. Chris, tonight at 6, you'll hear more from Dolan. Reporting live in studio, Wesley Days, Western Mass News.
Wesley, thank you for that live report.